All right, let's now turn to the socialism side of the scientific socialist equation and develop the logic here. The Marxists are, of course, determinists. They argue that the cause and effect relations, the material forces that are operating in the universe, economics among them being the most fundamental, play out in certain necessary stages, and that the human being's entire history, right, can be explained in terms fundamentally of the underlying logic, a dialectic logic in their case, of economic forces working themselves out. Human beings, of course, have a long history, so to speak, and have gone through various economic stages, and the current stage that we are in is not the final stage, but we are certainly approaching, from the Marxist perspective, one of the great cataclysmic moments, one of the near final stages in the overall ultimate development of the human society and human economy. So if we just, in fairly crude terms, look at human history in economic terms, the first and primary mode of organization is a tribal, right, mode of organization. We have small hunter-gatherer bands, and they organize themselves in tribal structures. They can be small, just a few families. They can be large, and so forth. What then happens is there's a logic to the development here, and then at a certain point we develop into various sorts of empires, in which one tribe will succeed in bringing a number of tribes under its purview, and then we start to have a more larger organization. Geographically speaking, there's typically an urbanization, right, that occurs here. There will be one basically urban center that will be the capital, and it will have an urban dynamic, and then there'll be a number of smaller centers, but still a large number of agriculture, and perhaps even still hunter-gatherers under their dominion. The next major stage is that the empires become formalized and rigidified into a certain set of structures that we know as feudalism. This is something that happened in Asian countries, Chinese feudalism, Japanese feudalism, the feudal structure in India, and then certainly there are any number of feudal structures that came to exist in Europe as well. Feudalism is very hierarchical, and out of feudalism there's a necessary logic that develops into capitalism early in the modern world. We know that there are a number of revolutions that occurred that undermined and overthrew feudalism, and so currently we are in the capitalist stage of development. And the Marxists argue that capitalism has its own internal logic of development, economically speaking, and it will give rise to another kind of revolution, a future revolution, though one that may be in the offing from the Marxist perspective, and that will usher in an era of socialism, and socialism will have a couple of substages as well. But to keep it simple, we will have this structure in place for now. All right, now, an important point here from the Marxist philosophical perspective is that this development, right, this economic development, is an ironclad development. They see it as an expression of the underlying metaphysics. The metaphysics is materialistic. The laws that govern material processes development are themselves deterministic, and so there's a necessary logic, so to speak, that the human history has to go through these stages, and so it is only a matter of time before the economic logic of capitalism works itself out, and there is a revolution that brings socialism about. And I have a quotation here from Marx to that effect here. On, quote, the natural laws of capitalist production, unquote, and then picking up a quote again a little bit later, it is a question of these laws themselves, of these tendencies working with iron necessity towards inevitable results. The country that is more developed industrially, that is to say, countries that are in later stages of capitalism here, only shows to the less developed the image of its own future. So again, I'm emphasizing the deterministic element of Marxism here. Now, we are in the capitalist phase in terms of human history. If the Marxists look at the world, they say obviously some cultures are still more feudal, some parts of the world are still empires, some parts even are still tribal. So it's not the case that all humans are homogeneously developing right at the same stage, but nonetheless it is the capitalist countries that are the most advanced economically, And it's in the capitalist countries that we can most clearly see the economic logic working out that is going to bring the socialism that the Marxists are in favor of. So what I want to do next is have a closer look at how capitalism came to be from the Marxist perspective, what its internal logic is, and what's necessary for capitalism to evolve or revolve. Actually, it's going to be a revolution is necessary here to bring about socialism. That said, I want to temporarily erase the socialism here and fill in a number of substages within the, broadly speaking, capitalist logic of development here, and we'll bring the socialism back in at the appropriate developmental stage. All right, so capitalism developed out of feudalism. Feudalism, as we know, is a system that is based on hierarchy. That is to say, we have the king or the religious authority who's at the top, sometimes struggle between those two there. Then we have the rest of the aristocracy. We may have a small class of freeholders or yeomen, a number of guilds perhaps, and then the broad mass of the population, though, is the peasantry, right, or the serfs. And all of the economic power, all of the political power, even all of the moral authority and so forth is at the top of the hierarchy, and those who are lower down in the hierarchy have whatever it is that they have by the leave of those who are higher up in the hierarchy. So what we have then is a class-based system, and one's position in the overall social structure is dependent upon what class one happens to be born into, and everybody, wherever they are in the hierarchy, is in a position of being bound, right? It's a class-bound structure. You're born, again, with some exceptions here, you're born into a certain class, you are bound to that class for life, and all of your obligations and all of your responsibilities are then inhere upon you or attached to you by nature of the portion of the class that you are bound into. All right, what then happens is there's a series of capitalist revolutions in the early modern world, and feudalism is overthrown in much of Europe over the course of a couple of centuries here. And of course, under the case of capitalism, everybody is held to be equal in their rights, and rather than people being bound, they are they're rather held to be free, right, individuals. And so we have the emancipation of the serfs, we have the breakdown of the class structure, we have the institution of the idea that all of the laws of the land should apply equally to everybody. There shouldn't be a class-based structure. Everybody should be free to pursue their own mode of living, engage with other people socially by whatever choice that they want to make, and so forth. All right, so what we then have is an emergence of a system that is the exact opposite of the system that it grew out of.